A very good morning. Today is 28 July 2020. Today in this video we will be discussing the Hindu editorial page analysis. There are some important articles to be discussed. This is the cartoon of the day, which clearly shows that the immuno booster is papad, which is given by the government. There are some articles to be focused, but before I begin, I am Prashant. I welcome you all to Wifise Study Karo. This is regarding there is a need to be a map for the foreign policy. There are some reforms needed to be changed. This article focuses upon how the foreign policies need to be rechanged or reconsider the strategies. So in the backdrops of the setbacks, especially in the neighborhoods, the country has to reconsider its diplomatic trajectory. Not long ago, India was seen as a natural rising power in South Asia and Indian Ocean region. It was the de facto leader of the South Asian Association for the Regional Cooperation, that is SAARC. It has historical and cultural ties with Nepal. SAARC also enjoyed a traditional goodwill and influence with Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. It also made investment worth billions of dollars in Afghanistan and cultivated vibrant ties with the post-Taliban stakeholders in Kabul. It also committed itself to multilateralism and a Central Asia connectivity project, with Iran being its gateway. It was cooperating with China at the same time, while the long border between the two countries remained largely peaceful. Cut to the present, India is perhaps facing its gravest national security in crisis of 20 years, with China having changed the status quo along the line of actual control in the western sectors in favor. The border saw violent clashes last month, which led to the fatalities in the first time since 45 years, and Nepal had turned hostile, having adopted a new map and revived the border disputes with India. Sri Lanka had titled towards the China, which is undertaking massive infrastructure project in the Indian Ocean island. Bangladesh is clearly miffed at the Citizenship Amendment Act 2019. When Afghanistan is undergoing a major transition, India is out of the multi-party talks. Iran has inaugurated a railway link project connecting the Chabbar project on the Gulf of Oman to Sudan, which India was to have constructed without India. How did we get here? There are specific reasons can be found for those setbacks, and also some of the foreign policies need to be static. But what makes the current downturn serious is that there is a relative decline in India's smart power, especially in the neighborhood and the extended neighborhood, which demands a deeper pursuit of the foreign policy trajectory itself. And also, when we dig into the deep, there are three problems can be found out which are more or less linked to this decline. First is a closer alignment policy with the US and line coupling and the foreign policies with the domestic politics and hubris. The US line, which says that India's official policy is that it is committed to multilateralism even after the India started moving away from non-alignment, which it calls irrelevant in the post-Cold War of world. New Delhi maintained a strategic autonomy would remain the bedrock of its policy thinking, but there has been a steady erosion in the India's strategic autonomy, which predates the current government. When India started deepening its partnership with United States, which was historical necessity, New Delhi began steadily aligning its policies with the US interests. But in the case of Iran, the agreement between the India and Iran, which developed a Chabhar project, was signed in 2003, but India, under the pressure from US, was moving slowly, despite the fact that the project offered India an alternative route to Central Asia bypassing Pakistan. India voted Iran at the United Nations, scuttled an ambition of gas pipeline project, and cut down the trade ties drastically. After the Iran nuclear deal was signed in 2015, India immediately stepped up the oil purchases, and expanded works at Chabbar. In 2016, when the Modi traveled to Tehran and signed a trilateral connectivity project with Afghanistan and Iran, but when US President Donald Trump pulled the US out of the Iran deal in 2018 and reimposed sanctions on the country, India towed the US line, bringing down its oil imports to zero. This dilly-dallying to the tunes of policy changes in the Washington coexisted with India's deepening defense and military ties with the US. Washington wants India to play a bigger role in Indian Ocean and the Pacific region to contain Chinese rise. So while India had been cautious of becoming an ally, it has steadily deepened military-to-military cooperation in the recent past. The Logistic Exchange Memorandum Agreement, that is LMOA, is one example. These developments probably altered Beijing's assessment of India. The border aggression at different points of the line of actual control could not be localized conflict. It is a part of a larger strategic moves initiated by the top brass of political or People's Liberation Army, that is China's. One of the reasons for the shift could be Beijing's assessment that India has already become a de facto ally to the US. The forceful altering of the status quo on the border is a risky message as much as New Delhi as it was in Washington. The livelihoods of supply chains, there has been a lot of discussion around the lack of capacity. Sorry, it was continued part of so this is regarding the India and its foreign policy. There should be a reforming changes to be brought out. So domestic politics which come into picture, at least two decisions taken by the government, mainly keeping its domestic audience in the mind, have had a foreign policy. Firstly, the passing of CAA, that is Citizenship Amendment Act. The official narrative had been that India is offering citizenship to the persecuted minorities of select countries in its neighborhood, and also India's neighborhood, some of which are its long-time friends. These countries are genuinely upset with India's move to Muslim, including those subset persecuted in neighboring countries, were by design excluded from the citizenship program. And now Bangladesh took offense at the CAA and National Register of Citizens, from which the government has temporarily backed off, and the political rhetoric in India against the termists from other countries. Bangladesh media reported recently that India envoy in Dhaka had tried to fix an appointment with the Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina for the 4 months, but did not get the one. There were also anti-India protests in Afghanistan. Secondly, the abrogation of the special status of Jammu and Kashmir. This was one of the popular move among those who from the support base of ruling party, but it led to suspension of the fundamental right of Kashmir Valley, which for the prolonged period that was damaged India's reputation as a responsible democratic power and gave propaganda weapons to Pakistan. The move did not help India quell militancy either, as the valley continues to see violence in nearly a year after this decision. More importantly, the changes of the status quo in Jammu and Kashmir, including the bifurcation and reduction of the erstwhile state into union territories, could also be another factor for the prompted China to move aggressively towards the border of Ladakh. And the perils of hubris, misplaced confidence, does not do good from the rising powers. The great powers wait to establish their standing before declaring they have arrived. The Soviet Union started acting like a superpower after it won the Allies. The Second World War, China bided its time for the 4 decades before it started taking on the mighty US. Since 1970, it focuses on almost entirely been on the economic rise. India should learn from at least these modern examples. If it did, it would have used high-handedness in the Nepal during the country's constitutional crisis, and also caused a traditional civilization ally to hostile. So India has to reconsider its foreign policy trajectory. It is a big power with one of the world's biggest militaries. This is regarding India has to reconsider its foreign policy and change accordingly with the pattern and changes. The next article is regarding the coronavirus and opportunity to reshape the healthcare. So the COVID-19 pandemic has massively disrupted the lives. Besides direct devastation of health, the epidemic and the lockdown have had myriad indirect effects, and be it environmental or livelihood or supply chain. There has been a lot of discussion around the lack of capacity of a healthcare system to fight this epidemic. So the care and COVID-19 impact is that Indian healthcare has been increasingly privatized over the last few decades. This has also led to intense market competition, and uniquely unregulated form of healthcare has thrived. It has also been marked by several questionable practices. This has been under the media and public glare, leading to the huge trust deficit. Will the changed milieu have an impact? Milieu means an environmental impact. Have an impact on this? How will this affect care to other conditions? COVID-19 has also led to dramatic reduction in the number of patients seeking care. This is especially true of planned, non-urgent problems including procedures and surgeries. Many patients are scared to visit the health facilities fearing COVID-19, while this has caused a collateral damage, with the condition of some patients worsening or taking an unfortunate turn. There may be indeed those who have avoided procedures in turn for the commissions is entrenched in India. This leads to a significant negative consequence, but the increased patient expenses, patients not reaching to the right doctor or not getting the appropriate investigation, and also erosion in the doctor-patient relationship and the image of fraternity. It puts ethical doctors in a quandary, making them clinical about the profession. However, during this pandemic, availability of the doctors, beds and proximity are now chief drivers for the patient referrals rather than commission route. Most practices have had to take the forced detox of the sorts from this addiction. Like in life, there are several gray areas in the treatment decisions where doctors are not sure of best way to forward the patients. For example, terminal patients with a widespread cancer so often prescribed chemotherapy, which can cause side effects worse than the disease. Without the impact of lifespan or quality of the life, oncologists end up in prescribing chemotherapy to such patients instead of symptomatic treatments to alleviate the pain and weaknesses because of the urge to do something, or even financial imperatives. The danger of chemotherapy with the COVID-19 lurking in the air has made everyone weigh its pros and cons, and also the most caution than usual. The pandemic may have finally taught our population the importance of not coughing or spitting in the open. These may be indeed have more far-reaching benefits in much larger populations. And also there are two sides of a churn. It may have unwittingly lead to some desirable changes by circumstantial curb or unwarranted medical practices. This churning may even lead to genuine reflection among the healthcare providers. The question is whether this effect will linger on. Will these lessons learned during the epidemic nudge us towards rational or ethical care? However, there are dangerous fallouts in the disruption as well. The breakdown of the overburdened healthcare facilities, negative impact on the morale of healthcare workers, and also collapse of the private sector institutions. With the hospitals and the doctors' income falling down during this pandemic, there also might be a resurgence of unethical practices with a vengeance as the industry tries to make up its losses. Though the prices in the private hospitals have been capped, loopholes in the system may be found, such as for profiting in the personal protective equipment. So the call of the duty has led to many to don coronavirus warriors outfits and set aside commerce for now. It has also forced them to consider alternative paradigms. Public respect for the profession has also improved. If we can seize this chance to correct undesirable practices which have to become an albatross around our neck, it may help return trust of the doctor-patient relationship, which was under severe threat before this pandemic. So this is regarding how the coronavirus and the treatment, and also the impact of the private hospitals and their treatment, but there should be trust created between the patient and the doctor even during this pandemic, which was earlier. The next article is regarding the regarding the balanced diet, which says that majority cannot afford a balanced diet. Even millions who are above the poverty line do not have access to the health and nutritious food in India. The Food and Agriculture Organization (FAO) shows that hundreds of millions of people in India are above the international poverty line, that is around $1.90 purchasing poverty parity, that is PPP, per the person per day, cannot afford a healthy, nutritious food. And also a detailed analysis of the cost of affordability of health diets would also around the world says that there are three types of diets. The first is the basic energy sufficient diet. This is one of which the required calorie intake is met by consuming only the cheapest starchy cereal available, says rice or wheat. A requirement of 23,329 kilocalories of healthy young women of 30 years is taken as a standard reference. And the second is a nutrition adequate diet, one whether there is a required calorie norms and also stipulated requirements of 23 macro and micro nutrients are met. This diet includes the least cost items of different food groups. And the third diet is healthy diet. This is one which meets the calorie norms and The macro and micronutrient norm also allow for consumption of diverse diet from several food groups. Defining a healthy diet is more complex than the other diets. The FAO also actual recommendations for selected countries. The Indian recommendation includes consumption of items from 6 groups, that is starch, staple, protein rich fruits, legumes, meats, eggs, dairy, vegetables, fruits and fats. Using the data of retail prices from commodities around 170 countries, a linear programming technique are also used to identify the cost of each of these diets. The following are the foods of the South Asia. First, the energy sufficient diet or eating only cereals to meet the calorie requirement costs around 80 cents a day. This is regarding South Asia countries. In short, poor in India and other South Asian countries cannot get the calories by sticking in rice or wheat alone. So this is regarding the Indian status. If we just eat rice or wheat, there is no possibility that we can get the enough calories. Secondly, the nutrient adequate diet costs around $2.12. This is more than the international poverty line. If a person income just above the poverty line spends her entire day expenditure on food, that is ignoring fuel, transport, rent, medicines or other expenditures, even they are not affordable to the nutrient employees. So whatever the limitations of SOFI methodology, there are also some clear and simple messages. First, those we officially count as a poor in India with a cutoff of lower than the international norm, that is around $1.9 a day, cannot afford a nutrient adequate diet, let alone the healthy diet. So secondly, even those with the incomes of twice the international poverty line cannot afford a healthy diet. If we want to reduce the malnutrition and food insecurity, we have to address the problem of affordability of the health diets. This is regarding the balanced diet and how most of the people are not affordable for this diet, even though there is a good amount of knowledge required. The next article is on Sudan's trouble. This next article is on environmental policy. In a reverse gear on draft of EIA notification, how this impacted. The draft EIA notification needs wider consultation and progressive changes. The Union Minister of Environment has been spotlight on more than one of the occasions during this pandemic as it worked to push through retrograde environmental decisions in the atmosphere on general paralysis. In April, Environmental Minister Prakash Javadekar used a virtual conference to ensure that the National Board of Wildlife Standing Committee stamped its approval on several projects with a serious implication of conservation. He also introducing a new environmental impact assessment, that is EIA notification. Now in the draft it seeks that replace the existing EIA notification of 2006 and also the proposed provisions show that the ministry had gone to greater lengths reduce even remove the public participation or by extension independent expert opinion from process of granting environmental clearances. Public reporting of violations may also not be taken cognizance of. Okay, there are also no arguments about the importance of development project. It also resorted to a sophistry in classifying activity for the exemptions. And also section 26 provides a list of projects that would not arrest environmental clearances or permissions, including coal mining and seismic surveys for oil, methane and shale gas on some land. Section 14 provides exemption for some other projects from public consultations, also limiting the scope of public involvement to the districts concerned in the case of national parks and sanctuaries where the pipeline infrastructure will pass. Roads and the highways get liberal concessions. Further, it retained the clause if the public agencies or authorities reconsider the local situation not conducive to participation by citizens, the public consultation need not include a public hearing. So the center has displayed unseemly haste to get them in the place of Mr. Javadekar, not aided credibility to trying to shut down the public responses to the draft clearly. So clearly the center attempts at weakening checks and balances are not new. A study of coal mining clearances shows that around 4,302 hectares of forest were diverted during 2014 to 18, favoring extraction over conservation. COVID-19 had powerfully demonstrated the value of nature for well-being of lost forests and captured wildlife, bringing the virus reservoirs closer to humans of foul air, destroying their health. This is regarding the EIA norms by the government of India. The next article is on Sudan's trouble because of the massacre over the 60 people around the weekend of Sudan region, and also for the escalation in the violence blighting the territory since 2019 ouster of the country's dictator Omar al-Bashir. About 500 armed men targeted the committee Masalit in the West Darfur's master town, according to the UN office for the coordination of humanitarian affairs. On Friday, around 20 people, including the women and children, were gunned down in the South Darfur town, which was displaced. Farmers were returning to the region under recent government-backed agreements. This is regarding the Sudan and how the things are going on. Well, some officials have sounded positive on the question of top military officials in the traditional government, or also said that the concern about the risk and other close to him to be implicated. Meanwhile, extraditing Mr. Bashir, now imprisoned in Khartoum, could serve a useful trade-off for the government to restore the ties with West and have sanctions removed to attract the investment. Sudan's largely young and educated population counts on advances in the economic growth and guarantees the democratic freedom to the better its prospect overall. So this issue will be test the ties between the military and civilian-led government, and also credibility of the progress to participate in democracy. At any rate, securing the peace in the nation West is critical for Sudan's border democratic transition that is set in the motion of the last year. This is regarding the Sudan and how there's a trouble in continuing violence, and reminder for the task of restoring the peace among the ethnic group. That's all for the end of editorial discussion. If you are new to my channel, I request you all to subscribe to my channel.